Belarus opposition leaders are calling for a general strike after more than 2 months of protests demanding the resignation of President Lukashenko. They issued the ultimatum earlier this month. In the hours leading up to the deadline of midnight on Sunday, tens of thousands of people swarmed the streets of the capital for one of the largest anti-government rallies since protests began in August. Hermione G tells us more.
More than 100,000 protesters flooded the streets of Minsk. It was the final day of an ultimatum set by the opposition for President Alexander Lukashenko to resign. A convoy of buses carried security personnel and metal cordons to the city centre, where law enforcement officers threw stun grenades to dispel the crowds. Exiled opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya set the deadline for President Lukashenko earlier this month. She also called for an end to the violence and for the release of political prisoners, warning that the alternative would be a crippling general strike. Tikhanovskaya has been rallying support since early August, when Lukashenko won a sixth term in a disputed presidential election. Thousands of demonstrators were reportedly detained during Sunday's protests. Authorities had warned they would sanction the use of live ammunition. A planned pro-government rally was dropped on Friday, with officials citing safety concerns. Alexander Lukashenko is standing firm despite pressure from the European Union and other Western countries, who have slapped a wave of sanctions for vote rigging and police violence on his allies. Hermione G, Euronews.
Franak Viakorka is the international relations advisor to Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. He says the crackdown on strikers has already begun.
This early morning, the workers of different companies announced the strike, and unfortunately, Riot police and KGB began dispersing and arresting workers announcing the strike. So what will happen next, it's hard to predict.
How much support is there for this strike? Because there have been previous ones in August and September, but there was quite a lot of talk that there was going to be bigger strike action than actually came into fruition on those days.
The strikes in August, just after elections, were rigged, were not prepared enough. They were announced. Many workers tried to organize the strike, but they were stopped by their administrations. Right now, workers are united in the trade unions, in some small initiatives and groups. They know how to do the strike, and I expect several enterprises will stop their operation today. Riot police and security services will do all possible to prevent them from striking. But I have a big hope on the private sector, on teachers, on doctors, on all those working not in the big working enterprises, but those who can stop and paralyze the work of Lukashenko's regime.
There are some workers who have voiced the fact that they'd like to strike, but actually they're afraid to. They're also afraid that someone else might take their job if they just don't show up today. What numbers are you actually talking about? How many people do you expect to take part today?
I'm sure that several 100,000 people are ready to join the strike today. We already see that in Minsk, many companies close their doors. Majority of restaurants, cafeterias, service entrepreneurs do not work today. Is it enough to stop economy? It's hard to say. The most important to stop the big enterprises. If big enterprises will not work today, that will be already success. But we all know the experience from Hungary and from Poland that workers' movement is the strongest one. And when workers are announcing the strike, authorities feel very hard to detain them and to attack them. So let's see.
What is the larger plan here? If the strike goes ahead, as you anticipate it will today, what kind of response are you expecting from the government?
We expect today the first day of the strike, and we will see what will happen in the end of the day. The most important to avoid violence, because the biggest thing I'm afraid of that Lukashenko will begin shooting the workers and beating people supporting the strike. I think Lukashenko in such situation, he's very impulsive and he makes many mistakes. I don't have illusions that he will make concessions and he will support the opposition demands, but I'm sure that he will need to do something today or tomorrow or day after tomorrow, because pressure on him is increasing.